February edition of Indie Insight is live and Canada has taken storm. Thank you for joining us, and we hope you enjoy all of the authors that are here today. If you don't have time to sit and listen to the whole segment, I enjoy you to take your time. Down below in the credits, you'll see different segments that will get you to each interview if you stop at any point. And we thank you always for joining us for GoIndieNow's Indie Insight. Thank you for joining us for Indie Insight. Today I have author Kelly Sharon with me. Did I say that right?
You said it perfect.
Thank you. Kelly, thank you for joining me. Can
Thank
you
you.
tell me a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks for having me. I've been writing for about 12 years, and I write urban fantasy and for young adults, and I write adult and young adult thrillers, so psychological thriller and a little bit more towards a touch of horror. I do like the dark and grisly. So yeah, I do that. I work as an education assistant, so I work in an elementary school um, with kids who just need extra support and have maybe learning disabilities or autism or something like that. So that's what I do during the day, which is great because I'm done every day at 3 and then have lots more time for writing. So yeah, it's a great job.
Wonderful. That's very cool. Kelly, could you tell us a little bit about the projects you've done or that you're working on?
Yeah, so I have two books out right now. One's called Pretty Wicked, and the other is Wicked Fallout. And one is mature young adult, and the Wicked Fallout, the second one, is a little bit more towards adult. I'd say it is actually adult psychological thriller. So they follow a serial killer, a young girl in the first book named Ryan Wilkinson, who's 15 years old. She's the daughter of a local police detective in Colorado. And she knows that she's a little bit different. She knows she has a penchant for all things dark and murdery. So she studies and does what she can to try to do some bad things and get away with it in her small town. Second book takes place 12 years later, and we see what she's up to at that point. And it alternates points of view between her as an adult at 27 years old and a forensic psychiatrist who is working with her. So it's actually a really, really fun series so far. There may or may not be a third one. I'm trying to decide. In the meantime, I have halfway completed a standalone adult thriller, and working on right now. My focus is on a young adult urban fantasy series about witches because I love it. It's not Harry Potter though. It's more, my tagline for it is more, if you like 90s movies, it's more like the Skulls meets the Craft. So secret societies, bad girls.
I love that stuff. That's great. I know people will love that.
I
So
hope so.
very cool.
Thanks.
Yeah. So do you find it's hard? My first book, Remember, was more like young adult. And then when I moved to Exigency book 2, it became darker. And then book 3, like as I progressed, it became more of a coming of age, or I felt less comfortable saying young adult.
Yeah.
So is that something you kind of felt from your change from book 1 to 2? And how does that work with your audience? Are you hoping they age with you?
Well, it was for the Wicked books, it was a big, huge departure, obviously, because I'm moving from 15 to 27. So I was kind of assuming there was a lot of people who were interested in book 1, but weren't young adult readers. So I actually was at a conference, and I had some agents say, I would love to see this as an adult book. So I tried to rewrite it as an adult book, and I just didn't like it. It wasn't the book that I wanted to do. So I thought I can turn this into a sequel. I like adult version of her character, and I kind of want to see where she's at now. So my hope was that with it, I wrote it as a standalone. So you get enough of the backstory from book 1 to be able to read it completely on its own. But it's a very adult voice and characterization for everybody involved. So, I've had people who have read both and liked it, and had people who read one or the other, depending on what genres they like and what age groups they like. So, it's worked out so far. Yeah.
Very cool. Um, all authors have to do research before they can write their book and not upset their reader. Is there anything interesting that you've ever researched that you'd like to share?
I fell down the research hole with those books because I was already so fascinated with serial killers and murder. I don't know why. I always say it's because I grew up a very vanilla life. Everything's been so happy and good and great that I can get lost in the dark side without feeling really, it's more just fascinated, right? It's like you want to look away from the car accident, but you need to see what's happening. So that's kind of how I view it. And I did a ton of research. So, research from primarily I looked at all serial killers because I wanted to get that the thought process as much as I could down. I watched interviews. I wanted to get down motivation if I could, personalities, ego, what that kind of looked like. I did a lot of research on teen killers in general. For the second book, I actually interviewed a Colorado prosecutor who worked with teen killers and or violent offenders. And I interviewed a few times a woman who worked, she was like an advocacy group who was trying to work with teen criminals who were given life sentences without the possibility of parole. Because there's new research and information around brain function. And while, yes, teenagers and children to a certain extent know right from wrong and they know what they're doing, but they're thought that the, brain hasn't developed to the point where it is as an adult. So to say life without the possibility of parole is cruel and unusual punishment. So she's trying to get people after, 35, 40 years, if they were young, to be released at a certain point. So she had some nice, interesting stories for me. And I got to take all that in. So lots of documentaries, lots of everything. So my husband would be like, no more murder, enough murder. And I'm like, just let me watch a little bit more. So
I just need a bit more.
Just a little more. It became like that, honestly. And some of it I'd feel sick to my stomach. But again, I was like, so I might fast forward it because the reenactments are really tough. But again, you're just like, what is happening in your head that makes you so different? And then, of course, I looked at the nature and nurture issue of, you have siblings in a family and they're raised the same way, essentially. But depending on their own ability to have resiliency and or their personality, why one might turn out to be one way and one another. And then there's thoughts on brain injury and it ruining a certain part of the prefrontal cortex, which is responsible for empathy. So there's all these different areas that I looked at for fun to see, why my character is the way she is and why she's choosing to do what she's doing. So like, it's really interesting because we have so much out there with the Harry Potter taking off the way that it is and everything else. And I'm like, I want to have a name for non-magic people, but really, is that too close? And, I was writing a book before I ever read Harry Potter because I was late to that game. And I started it about 10 years ago and I had Latin and Gaelic translations for spells. And I was like, that seems to be all over the place now. So it's like, you don't want to, can't really reinvent the wheel. People have a certain genre expectation, what they like, but it's that balance of trying to, figure out what I want to do. And then of course, researching fun things like what would be in a spell? I don't know, chicken feet and sage. Like, I'm not sure what that looks like. So it's fun. Fantasy is very fun. I'm actually going on a research trip tomorrow because it's a boarding school story, and which people tend to sometimes hate, but I love. And it takes place, the school is basically like a giant castle-like structure. So I'm going to Victoria where there are a few castles and I'm going to take a look around them to see exactly what they look like. So that's research. It counts.
I love that. No, that's great. People love to hear that kind of stuff. From the Wicca, like witches, are you doing like Wicca or more like
no,
like witch? I mean,
more witch and more they're definitely, yes, I would say like they use the energy in the universe. It's not so much that they have a god or a goddess that they get their magic from. It's more of a energy that they can harness that's already in the universe. And maybe a little bit of Mother Nature I'll throw in, we'll see. And the magic, coming up the magic system in the world is tough for me to get into that mind frame because I've been writing murder and crime scenes for so long that I'm like, switch it now. Let's go back to this. So yeah.
You have to decide what's right for you. So yeah, that makes sense.
So in mine, yeah, there's some blood magic and some elemental magic and a few different things that they play with. So
okay.
There's 5 different proficiencies and you would be able to delve into and play with different ones, but you'd have one that you're pretty much learning to master. And usually in my story, it would be, something from that bloodline would.
Oh, very cool.
The time, yeah, say what that would be for you. So it's very fun.
The indie community, I always talk about it. I love it. I'm so involved in it. I love GoIndieNow and what we do for authors and how everyone just seems to be, I always say it's a big hippie commune on the internet of love. People will share like other people's stuff. People just love each other and share, and so much support that it gets nauseating. But what do you have with that experience with that, the indie community?
It's so generous. And I think that's a very good summary of what it's like. you know, since hooking up with my publicist and meeting a lot of the other authors that he works with, a lot of them happen to be indie, and there is just so much support. You know, I've never met you, I don't know you, but let's cheer for each other and let's support each other. It's wonderful. I've had some other, because as we know, like a lot of people still, there's a stigma. It's going away, it's getting better, but there still is a little bit of a stereotype there and a stigma with being an indie author. And, you know, to have other people swoop in your defense or to promote you is always so nice and so touching. And I think it is changing. Better, you know, you're seeing some of the big 5 stuff come out and it's not quite up to par what it used to be. And you're seeing some indie stuff really bring it. And you're just like, wow, I'm proud to be in this community. So people have a stigma of it being, you know, a vanity press from, you know, 25 years ago. And it's not that. So, you know, the more people I hope will, you know, reach out and from, you know, traditional and, you know, not wait for all the Andy Weirs and the Hugh Howies out there who have, you know, sold $1 million worth before they look at any of us, which is tough. It would be great. Most indies, I think, would agree being a hybrid author would be the ideal. Then you can still do what you want, but you have a little bit more, you know, maybe in advance, which would be lovely. But yeah, the people themselves are so great and they take what they do very seriously. This is often their business. This is their passion. And they don't, you know, they're not driven by somebody else. Their deadlines are set by them and they're really motivated, knowledgeable, kick-ass group that I'm happy to be a part of. So
That was well said. Very well said. Thank you so much for joining me. It's been a really great conversation. I look forward to actually reading your scary books and having nightmares.
Thank you so much, Marnie. I hope you do in the nicest way. But I enjoy you thoroughly and feel like we would be friends. So I love you.
We could be best friends forever. I'm like, oh no, there's a book about someone being stalked because they talked on an interview.
Oh no.
That'd actually be a good book.
Let's write that together.
Well, I talked to somebody about writing a book together. I'm like, I think I'm too like, I'd be like, really?
Oh, I'm
And they'd
really
want to cut my stuff and I'd get mad at you. Pretty bossy.
Where I'm like, it has to be like this. I don't think I would do that.
No, we'd probably be too alpha. Wouldn't work out. All right, we're already not friends again.
Oh my God, we broke up already. This is devastating.
Welcome to another edition of Indie Insight. Today I have with me author Laura Lovett. Thank you, Laura, for joining me.
I'm very happy to be here. Marnie, thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Now, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I'm based in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, which is having a very cold January. Our weather goes up and down, and right now it's a cold spell. But when it's not so cold, we're able to spend a lot of time skiing on the beautiful Rocky Mountains, which we love. I have 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, age 12, 9, and 7. And I run 3 psychology practices. So I'm a doctor of psychology and specifically workplace psychology. And I have a practice here in Alberta, a practice in Ontario, and a practice that's more global where we consult to companies around the world. And we're focused on making companies and leaders better places to work, better managers, etc. So that's who I am in a nutshell.
Could you tell me a little bit about the books that you have published?
Sure. So one of my dreams from the time I was a little girl was to write and tell stories. So I grew up telling myself stories. I grew up as an only child. I had 5 siblings, but they were all significantly older than me. So they had all moved out of the house in my childhood, and I had to entertain myself because I didn't have playmates always available. So I entertained myself through 2 things, through telling stories and through drawing out the stories. So I ended up becoming a pretty good artist and a pretty good storyteller from a young age. But then I, went down my career path like we all do, and I decided to go into the field of psychology. I mean, becoming a writer seemed pretty scary and pretty nebulous, but it wasn't until my later 20s that I decided I would start my first novel. I went through a career dilemma where I needed to decide whether I would pursue my doctorate in psychology. I already had a master's. I had worked for a few years in psychology, and I really liked psychology. or whether I should go down a Master of Fine Arts path and go into English and become a novelist, which was also a dream of mine. And I saw a career counselor at the time and decided that I would do the novel as a hobby and I would go down the psychology path for various reasons. But I think that it's a tough path going down the novelist path. There's a lot of risk to it, where there was less risk to the psychology path. I knew if I worked hard that I could get my doctorate. If I worked hard, I could get a job. It was a more sure path, whereas the novelist was, okay, there's not that many novelists that really make it. And the other thing was, I love being around people. I'm an extrovert. I'm a high extrovert. So to be writing all day, every day, that wouldn't work for me. It would feel too isolating. So I penned my first novel, started it right before I started my doctorate. Took me 8 years to finish it. And I think that's an important message for authors, is that it's better late than never. It's better to do something, even if it takes you a long time, than not to do it at all.
Absolutely. That's so true. It took me 3 years to write my first book. So,
there you go. Yeah, it seems like a long time, but those 3 years could have passed without having a book or with having a book. The 3 years are going to pass regardless, Marnie, right?
Exactly. So your first book, Losing Cadence, do you want to tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. So it's about an abduction. So a man who's obsessive, very obsessive, compulsive, he abducts his high school sweetheart 10 years later, 10 years after she broke up with him. The thing about this book is he's become a billionaire. So he is extremely obsessive, has a lot of means, a lot of money, and a very brilliant mind. So he's able to create a life for them that he's envisioned, a perfect life. I mean, who wouldn't want to have, a staff working for you, houses in various locations, mansions, a private island, a private jet? Who wouldn't want that, right? But she is abducted into this life in her late 20s, so 10 years after high school, and it's the experience of having to try and flee from an obsessive abductor. Meanwhile, she has a fiance, she has a life, she's a professional musician in a symphony in San Francisco, but she gets abducted from San Francisco, and the book takes place in California, New York City, an island off of Jamaica, and in Oregon, and in Montana. So Montana is near and dear to my heart because we had a summer cabin there for the last 10 years, and I grew up going to Montana. It's the nearest state to us in Canada. The place I'm in Western Canada, you just drive down 5 hours and you're in Montana. Beautiful, beautiful woods and mountains and lakes. And yeah, so that's a bit of why I set some of the novel in Montana.
That sounds amazing. I did notice that you have a second book out, Finding Sophie. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Sure. So Finding Sophie came out in November, and it's the sequel to Losing Cadence. The books are meant to be read one after the other. And I can pretty much guarantee people who finish Finding Losing Cadence will want to read Finding Sophie, because Losing Cadence ends on a cliffhanger. So that's what I'm saying. Finding Sophie takes place 12 years later, and it involves some of the same characters, actually, the same main characters, some new characters, a cast of new characters, and it takes place in different locations, but a chunk of the book takes place on a super yacht or a mega yacht, which is one of the biggest yachts in the world. It involves another abduction, and I'm not going to give away too many details, but it's very fast-paced, and it goes into a lot of the backstory of the antagonist, Richard, and his childhood, as well as present day what's happening. And it gives the reader a lot to think about, but it toys with the reader's emotions, which is what a psychological thriller does. And it makes you love and hate at the same time the antagonist. And people have different experiences with that, but that's what makes it so interesting to hear what my readers think. But the reviews so far of Finding Sophie are, I would say, even better than losing cadence. So I'm really excited about that, because sometimes a sequel isn't as good as the first book. I mean, we see that a lot with books and movies, and I feel like I've become an even better writer. I mean, I think my first book is well written for sure, but I've become even better at writing by spending time with so many best-selling authors and at writing retreats and stuff. And the second book, I'm super excited about it coming out and becoming a bestseller, hopefully soon.
Wonderful. And will there be a third?
I'm not going to answer that. You have to read the second one, and then you can tell me what you think.
Okay, I appreciate that. So you talk about all the locations and yachts. So writers have to do a lot of research to make their books authentic. I'm assuming this is not anything based on, like, other than the locations, on experience. What kind of research did you have to do to make your book?
Oh, so that's a very good question. So I have assistants that help me with the research, in terms of, I need to know more about show choirs, children's show choirs, and what some of the competitions are like, and what types of songs the show choirs sing. That would be an example, right? And a lot of that you can find online. But other pieces of my book, like super yachts, you can find that online, but I actually like to talk to people who are experts in it. So I have a large network, and I actually got to interview someone who had sold luxury yachts in Florida for his career. So he answered a lot of my questions about luxury yachts and how they can't just dock anywhere, and how do they move in and out of port, and how long can they stay at sea, and what type of staff would you need on one of these things, because they're pretty much a miniature cruise ship, right? So I couldn't have it seem unrealistic, of course, because that really bugs readers. So I did my research there. I did my research on the helicopter side of it, with Navy officers, because it involves the sea and helicopters and boats, right? So how fast the ships move, how fast the yacht moves, all of that sort of thing. I did multiple interviews with experts on those topics who could answer my questions, and then I would make sure that it was plausible. So that's how I did it.
I like that answer. I did actually have a yacht in one of my books, and it was so tiny, and it was a tiny yacht too. It wasn't your super yacht, but like I spent like probably 4 hours going through floor plans and trying to figure out where everything was located for this like paragraph in my book. So I know that's something a lot of people do. We'll get all this research, and then it's like it's hardly even in your book for the hours you put into it.
Yeah, that's true. I remember I drew out the diagram of it because it has multiple floors, but I spent lots of different scenes on the yacht, so I had to know what was the upper living room versus the multimedia room versus the dining room, the wine cellar, the kitchen. Staircases had to make sense. So it was, but once I got it mapped out, then I could keep telling the story on it. I didn't want to be slowed down. I mean, I think a thriller writer likes to keep the pace going. And if you get into too many details about the scene, if it gets to be bogged down, then it slows down the action. So
Exactly.
it's a fine balance, isn't it, really, Marnie?
It's yeah. And also then when you're researching, sometimes other things will pop up, and soon you're down that rabbit hole of like forgetting well, for me, it's forgetting what I was doing and having to get back to it.
One more thing about my research, I love to basically touch and feel and experience some of the things that I write about. So we were in San Diego last year. I was speaking at a conference called World Workplace. So that was for my career. But we ended up driving around to try and find a big yacht so that I could see what it was like. And there was this massive yacht parked, or docked, I should say. And it was by the US Midway, which we also got to experience the US Midway. But this yacht was huge. And I said to my husband, I really want to get up to that yacht and get some photos of it. And so we had that planned. So it must have been some billionaire, right? Or Saudi prince or whoever. And so the next day we went to do it and it was gone, vanished. So then we had to drive to another part of San Diego where there's harbors and lots of yachts, but I couldn't find one that big. But I remember hopping over the fence and walking around the yachts and trying to get some pictures for my social media of yachts. And yeah, so that's just an example. It was kind of a fun adventure, but I wanted to share that with you.
I love that. Also, I spent 7 years in San Diego, so super sad that I'm not there now. It's so beautiful there.
It is so nice. You've lived in a lot of places, Marnie.
I know. I've had a fun life. So we'll see where that gets me. But yeah, no, San Diego, it's beautiful, and I'm glad that you were able to see the yachts. That's cool. As an indie artist, we have to do a lot of our own self-promotion. Is that something that you also experience?
I have a team because I'm a business owner. I'm a psychologist. That's my primary career. And I have 3 children, 12 and under. So I know a lot of indie authors do a lot of their own promotion and marketing, and they have to, right? Like they have to. For me, I need a lot of help doing that just because of my life, right? So I have a team. I have a great publicist, Mickey Mickelson from Creative Edge, and he sets up a lot of my promotional activities, which radio, news, I've been on the news, on the television, on multiple podcasts and things like that. And then I have help with my Facebook and Instagram. I have help from my assistant just keeping posts going. But of course, the posts have to be me. So I'm involved heavily, but I just have help making sure that all happens. And then we have some really exciting contests, right? And I think we try to get very creative with the contests. Like post a picture of you reading Finding Sophie in a unique place, and the winner will get an Amazon gift certificate, right? And it takes people 30 seconds to post. But we have all these cool photos right now on my Facebook author Laura Lovett page. And it's so cool to see where people are reading this book, right? And it's just really fun. I have quite a great community on my Facebook. So there you go.
That's fantastic. Yeah, I know. That's one of the fun parts of being an author. You didn't just write your book and now everybody buys it. You have to get it into their hands.
It was.
So I'm going to ask the indie community. I always describe it as being a very loving, supportive groups of people that will promote their books over you. Just last night, I did the live Go Indie panel, putting we in indie, where we talked about just that, how so many indie authors are spending a lot of their time promoting other authors. And so my question to you is, what's your experience with the indie community?
Very positive. I would say I am an avid networker, and I'm an avid helper, right? I mean, that's why I went into psychology, really. I wanted to help people, help society, help organizations, but mainly help people, right? And I've met so many indie authors, and I always, whenever I can, I buy their books, right? I mean, when I talk to Joe Compton, and I love the platform that you guys are doing with GoIndieNow, but I ordered his book immediately and gave it to my husband for Christmas, right? And what I always make sure to do is let's read the books and let's review the books, right? And I know the importance of reviews. So I buy books all the time. And I think one of the most fun parts of all this is how many good books I've read as a result of the experience. But I balance it between indie authors and traditionally published authors, because I think there's pros and cons of each. And either way, those are people that need support. And whether it's one or the other, they're just all part of my network. And I've gotten to know how this whole community works. And I've been invited to attend Thriller Fest, and I've gotten to know the executive director of Thriller Fest, who's an amazing woman. And I just read her book, The Freedom Broker, which I loved. And that's traditionally published, but who cares, right? I'm so happy to help support her too, right? And I think authors can waver between indie and traditional depending on where they are in their careers and their lives. And I don't think one is better than the other. I just think they're very different, apples and oranges pretty much in terms of your experience. But both have to do a lot of promotion. And I think traditionals think that the publisher is going to do everything for them, but that's not true. So Kimberly Howe, who wrote the Freedom Broker, KJ Howe, she is using Creative Edge. So she has to have a publicist, because the publisher doesn't always do all of that work for you.
Exactly. Yeah. So as far as Indian traditional, in a lot of ways, most of us are very similar. As far as our experiences, others, they just seem to have maybe the title is the problem. It's the label we put on people. Like, I'll read a book and I don't always know if it's an indie or a traditional when I'm reading it until later on. I'm like, wow, that was really good, or wow, that was really bad. But you're, like you said, people are people. Everyone has a story to share, and there's a book out there for everyone.
Exactly. And I've been judged. I've been, oh, do you have a publisher? Well, no, I'm independently published. Oh, right. Or I've approached agents where I sat across from the agent. Yeah, Losing Cadence is doing really well, and I'd really love you to represent me for Finding Sophie, right? I was trying to find an agent to pick up my series because I think my books could be a Hollywood movie, hands down. And that's my 2018 goal, is to explore that. Definitely movie material. And I sat across from an agent, I mean, a confident businesswoman, etc. And they totally, I remember this one agent last year, she's like, we don't pick up indie authors midway through a series, you know, and she just cut me off and tried to just demolish me. And I was so angry that I ended up, you know, writing to the conference and saying, look, like, you know, I'm confident and stuff, but this could really impact writers' self-esteem, right? You just can't, you have to be, you know, willing to give them feedback and willing to, I mean, maybe you won't take them on, but you have to spend some time and mentor and have a more balanced approach, and not make indies feel like they're just pariahs, basically, right?
Exactly. Well, also, when you do get published, when you do find a publisher, the first question people want to ask is, oh, well, did you get a bunch of money? And I always like to tell people, no, there's no money really in being an author. That's not why we do it. And now, do some people strike oil and, you know, have that luck? Yes. Do some people have very comfortable where they can write and not work? Very few, but that I know. But it can be done, but that's not why people do it. What advice would you give to someone that says, oh, I want to write a book, I have a story?
Oh, well, one of my goals is to inspire people to write or to follow their other passions that they don't make time for. And I agree with you. I think everyone's position is different, but I think that it has to be, why are you doing it, right? What do you want to get out of it? What's the reality of it? So I would always say, talk to other people who have done it before you, so you understand what you're getting into, right? But don't let the external factors, you know, just the money or the fame or publicity or whatever, those are external motivators. Don't let that get in the way of your intrinsic motivators, or what motivates you inside. So having a voice, being creative, telling a story, helping others, those sorts of things bring people even more joy than whether you necessarily make a lot of money out of it or become a bestseller. Would you agree?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, I just didn't want to pull it to me. I was like, yeah, everything she says is so awesome. Yeah. But no, thank you so much. I think that we have a lot of really good content, and you're a delight to talk to. So I appreciate that you took the time out of your morning to speak with me today. Welcome to another edition of Indie Insight. Today I have with me Coffin Hop Press. Thank you for
Hello.
joining me, guys. Can you
Hi.
tell us, introduce yourselves, please?
Yep, I'm Axel HOWERTON.
And I'm Rob BOSE.
And we collectively run Coffin Press, which is a small press publisher based in Calgary, Alberta, in Canada. We generally do dark crime and weird fiction. And we've published, what?
7 books?
7, 8, 12? A bunch of books.
Yes.
We currently, we publish a lot of anthologies, which are basically just themed to what we're really into and what we think we'd enjoy working on. And then we also publish a line of dark crime novellas called Noirvellas. And we've recently started working with single authors for single author collections, novels. We have some big stuff coming up in April, and a lot of stuff for the entire year to help celebrate the Year of Publishing Women. And we have 3 anthologies scheduled for this year. And then we have more books planned going forward for Lord knows how long.
That's great. So did you start out as just publishing your own works and then decided to become a press, or how did this come about?
When I first got back into fiction writing, I'd been an entertainment journalist for like 10 years, doing, interviews and movie reviews. And I kind of got burned out talking about other people creating things, and I wasn't really creating anything. So I decided to get back into fiction, and I started in horror. I started working for Dark Moon Digest, which is a horror quarterly. And I met a lot of people through that, and everybody was online kind of lamenting the fact that there wasn't really a lot of promotional opportunities for short story horror writers. But the romance writers were doing these blog hops all the time. So we decided we were going to try and set up a blog hop, but we wanted to do something different. So we set up a week-long blog hop the week before Halloween that was really interactive, had everybody on every site, had daily contests, daily giveaways. Everybody had to promote everybody else's sites actively. And it went really well for the first year, and we had, maybe 30 people. Second year, we had hundreds of people. Third year, we went way beyond that, and it got to the point where it was kind of unmanageable anymore. But it was called the Coffin Hop. And in the second year, a lot of the people that had first kind of put that together with me decided they wanted to put out a book. So being the guy that kind of had organized the hop in the first place, I ended up being the guy that organized the book. So that's called Death by Drive-In. And we decided to do a charity anthology to benefit Lit World, which is a world children's literacy organization. And so we put out this book. It had great interior art from a great underground artist in California, Nick Caesar. Had 22, I think, stories from amazing authors, some of whom have gotten much, much bigger since then. And then after that book had come out, I had the framework there. So when I had things that I had gotten rights back on stories, short stories that had been published and stuff, I was kind of playing around with, putting out Kindle singles and stuff like that. But I didn't really do anything seriously for a year or two. And then some other friends and I decided that we wanted to do a weird Western anthology, which really was just that some of us happened to at the same time have weird Western stories we couldn't get placed anywhere. So we decided we were going to do a book. It took a couple of years for that one to actually take shape, but that was the second Coffin Hop Press book called Tall Tales of the Weird West. And then right after that, almost, having kind of transitioned from horror into crime writing, I'd gotten into the crime writing community here in Calgary, but there wasn't a really concrete community, and there wasn't a lot of things going on. So I had started a Noir at the Bar event here because that was something that my friends in the States had been doing. And so we started doing one here, and it started kind of bringing people in. And again, people were asking to, let's put a book together. So I put together another book called AB Negative, which was Alberta-based crime stories from Alberta-based crime writers, including this guy who had sent me a story that I really liked, and I really loved his style and the kind of story, because it was kind of a supernatural detective story, and kind of just out of the box, which is what I usually like and what I like to write. And so we kind of, you know, struck up a relationship, working back and forth on that story, and then on other projects. After AB Negative, I kind of laid low for a little while. I had been trying to work on a science fiction noir anthology, but that one also kind of went sideways. And
yeah, that was a bit of a disaster.
Yeah. So, but I had been kind of working back and forth and talking to Rob about that one when I was putting it together. He had a book of short stories that I really liked and I really wanted to support. So when he started talking about options for self-publishing, because a lot of places weren't really doing short story collections, I offered to help him publish that and put it out, you know, under the auspices of Coffin Press. And then we just kind of, as we were working on that stuff, realized, well, why don't we just partner up and really turn this into a real, you know, a serious and professional publishing company. So from there, we started the line of novellas, the crime novellas, which I wrote the first book, which is called Con Morte. We picked up a second book from a UK author named Jack Strange that's done really well. And we also put out a Christmas collection, a Christmas anthology last November called It's a Weird Winter Wonderland, which has some amazing cover art by the legendary Tom Bagley. Has stories from everybody from Will the Thrill Viharo, David James Keaton, Jessica McHugh, to more local to us, writers like Laurie Zotman, Sarah L. Johnson. Sarah Johnson had a novel that we really loved that was going to be published by an Australian press that folded. So when we had the opportunity to grab that, we're now putting that out in April. That's called Infractus, and it's amazing. So the Christmas book, we started trying to, the idea was we were going to do a weird crime Christmas book. And we got so many submissions from the invitations that we sent out that really just totally split into weird stories about Christmas and the holidays and really dark crime stories. So it naturally just kind of split itself into two books. So now we have the Weird Winter Wonderland, which just came out, which has all the weird stuff in it, and it's incredible. And we already have a really great base for our crime anthology, our Christmas crime anthology, which we're tentatively calling Baby It's Cold Outside. That will come out next November, and that already has some stories in it from Rob Brunet, S.A. Cosby, who else do we have in there? E.C. Bell, a bunch of people. And then once we were kind of had things rolling and we were getting ourselves out there more, we picked up, we had a ton of submissions, especially for the Morvella line. We picked up a book from another Canadian author, Sean Bird, which is called Murdering Mr. Edwards, and it's kind of more traditional mystery crime than what we usually publish. But it's really well done, and it's kind of a Rashomon kind of multiple viewpoints of the same events, stories that all intertwine.
It's like 12 locked room stories kind of that are all interconnected. So.
Rob's done the editing on that one, so.
I'm the silent partner editor, mainly, as you can tell.
I can tell.
We're not taking open submissions. If you go on our website, for any of the anthologies that we have coming up, it has guidelines on there for what we're looking for. Generally, what we do, what we find works best, is we send out invitations to authors that we really admire or that we really want to work with, and we try and set up a base for the book with, you know, say 8 stories by invitation from authors that we really know will work well for that book, and then we'll leave the other 3 or 4 spots open for open submissions to try and help expose newer authors that may not be on our radar yet.
That's just the anthologies. We do have open submissions for the novellas. We're always looking for novellas.
Yeah, and for if someone has a novel or a short story collection that they think would fit our ethos, then by all means. The only thing we ask, and that again is up on the website, is send us a query first before you send a manuscript and everything else. You know, the usual.
That makes sense. Yeah, you don't want to get a ton of submissions that aren't what you guys are focused on. Now, this is an odd question, but is it Canadians only?
Nope.
Oh, our second novella was Manchester Vice, was written by Jack Strange. He's from Manchester, in England. And the one that we have coming out in April that you were going to mention.
I was about to mention, yeah, Rocket Rider and Little Putt Putt Go Down Swinging. It is just like a fantastic balls out throwback to the heyday of noir and pulp and hard-boiled fiction. It's basically, it's set in the 50s, and it's two kind of downtrodden characters that work on this kids TV show, on like a UHF kids TV show, and they their show gets canceled and they're kind of out on the street. They get mixed up with the mob, and there's all kinds of repercussions for things that they didn't do, and then they set out to get revenge. And it's so fantastic. It's so tight, and just incredibly well written. The second that we saw it, we got the submission, and I sent it to Rob to look at because I was working on other things, and he, like the same day almost, sent it back to me and said, "You got to read this right now." And damn, was he right.
Yeah, Timothy Friend. Where is he from?
Somewhere in the U.S. He's a filmmaker, and our paths had kind of crossed before. It was a funny story because I didn't realize that was the same Tim Friend, and he's made some kind of B horror movies that were really great, that starred some people that I knew from my entertainment journalism days. So it was kind of a weird little coincidence. But his novella is incredible, and it absolutely took me right back to the stuff that I love from Black Mask, like old Jim Thompson and Dashiell Hammett, and just kind of with more of a modern flavor, but still set in the 50s. And it's just, I can't say enough about how great that book is.
Very cool. It sounds like you guys have a great lineup of books and authors that are working with you. So I'm just going to ask this, and I may not even put it in the show. Novella, like the novellas versus the short story collection, anthology stuff, kind of, and versus novels. Like, is there a reason why that you guys kind of do the collections? I mean, do you feel like you get more readers that way? I mean,
No, it's
you're like, no.
We wanted to do a lot of that in support of, especially lots of people in our community here, just because there's not a lot of outlets for, not a lot of publishers want to publish short story collections, or like trying to sell a novella is really hard. But we like them personally, so we wanted to support that part of the community and have an outlet for people to be able to publish that kind of thing. So,
Well, you think there'd be more of a demand with the reality of short attention spans. The reason I do only about 15 minutes per segment is because we have short attention spans now. I mean, that's just with we have instant gratification, we have phones beeping at us, we have all the stuff that's always luring us from the here and now. That you think novellas and shorts would be like the ideal for people to start like reading more.
I think it's trending that way, and that was one of the reasons that we wanted to start the Noirvella line. To be perfectly honest, both of the Noirvellas that we started with were not really novellas. They're both novel length.
Short novels.
Yeah. Con Morte came out to 60,000 words, and Manchester Vice, I think, was a little shorter than that, but still well outside of the 25,000 word range usually.
But the next two are short.
The next two are novella sized. But part of the impetus to do that was because, now with the advent of digital, people, how when they're reading it, you don't physically have it in front of you to really be able to see how big it is. People aren't getting daunted by bigger books, and people aren't getting put off by smaller books. So it seemed like a good time to try and kind of play into that. And at the same time, it was something that we thought is kind of an underserviced market that's just starting to emerge. But with the anthologies have always been kind of what we're interested in doing, and they're more fun. I mean, we get to do the anthologies because we're doing all this other stuff, and hopefully once we build the company up, we're making money off of all the other stuff that pays for us to do these anthologies every year that are, you know, just for us to be able to work with people that we really admire and really want to work with and put together something weird and wonderful that, you know, may not be out there already, like weird Westerns. There's a ton of weird Westerns now, but when we did it, there wasn't a ton of them, you know, or the weird Christmas stories. Once ours came out, I noticed there were a few more kind of announced all of a sudden. And, you know, we're just trying to put together things that we want to work on. We have also for next November, Rob spearheading Knucklehead Noir anthology, which is, you know, kind of bumbling criminals and more comedic, which is something that both of us write. I had a whole series of short stories that came off of my first novel that fit right into that. And some of our favorite writers like Scott S. Phillips from New Mexico, we work with him all the time. We've had him in a bunch of books. He writes that kind of stuff. So that's something we really personally lean towards. So we wanted to really put something together that would really showcase that stuff. We also, in the summer, we have a collection called The Dame Was Trouble, which is some of the best Canadian female crime writers, because we wanted to kind of be part of the solution to the problem, and offer more in the way of showcasing female writers, especially female crime writers in Canada. We also have a short story collection from Canadian crime author Therese Greenwood that's coming out in the summer. What else do we have on tap? The Christmas book. In April is Murdering Mr. Edwards, Infractus from Sarah L. Johnson, and Rocket Rioter. We have a supernatural crime anthology that we're trying to start to put together for the following year. So we're really just kind of doing whatever we find interesting to us, and then the books that come to us that we get submissions for, you know, anything that really speaks to us that we really love and we want to support, we're going to try and put our energy behind.
Yes, and we're definitely looking for those. We have no...
That's really cool. Yeah, you have to.
If there's a book that you want to read, but it hasn't been written yet, then you must write it. Toni Morrison.
Yeah, because I mean, if anything, you have one reader that's just happy as hell to read your book. That's my thought. You're
That's
like,
more than one person, I hope.
it's nice to have more than one, but it's nice if several people enjoy your writing. But you have to be happy, I guess, with yourself first. I ask everyone about the indie community. As I describe it, it's a big, at least the experience I've had, it's a big hippie commune of love and giving. And have you guys experienced the same thing with the indie community?
Yeah, there's a great indie bookstore in Calgary called The Owl's Nest that we kind of really support as much as we can. And there's a lot of indie authors that do their book launches there. And the bookstore is awesome for promoting all the indies and us. And so there's a community that's kind of built up around that. That's awesome.
We have a big convention here that really helps foster the community, and there's a lot of crossover with different things. There's writing centers, the Alexander Writers Center here. I teach at a lot of the time, and most of the other people in the writing community go and work there and do classes. And people that are coming up, they start doing classes there. They come to things at Owl's Nest. They could start going to the convention, and the next thing you know, they're putting stuff out there, and they're actually an active part of the writing community. So it is nice here that's really developed the way it has. You know, I hear horror stories about bigger cities where people feel kind of shut out a lot of the time. And I think the internet has kind of democratized that a lot more and opened it up a lot more because there is a lot more support. Well, you always hear the horror stories about, you know, I forget what those guys were called, the Horror Writers Association thing with the sick puppies or whatever the hell they were called. There's always going to be some splinter group that, you know, has a problem with somebody, but for the most part, everybody I think, understands that none of us are going to get anywhere without helping each other get there, you know?
Yeah, this the convention is called When Words Collide. It's in August every year, and it's pure genre pretty much, and there's about 700 people that go, and it's supported by the romance writers, the crime writers, the horror writers, the Imaginative Fiction Association, which is the fantasy science fiction people. We support it. There's a couple of other indie presses or smaller presses in town that support it. So it's a great thing.
That's really cool. Yeah, I wish I had more opportunities where I'm at too, because Phoenix doesn't seem. We have a lot of writers, but not a lot of. I don't hear a lot of like people getting together, and a bookstore focused on indie authors would be amazing. Super, like another reason to move to Canada. Anyway, Rob and Axel, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I am really intrigued by your press and can't wait to check out some of the books. Just want to, like I said, I don't know why or how I got here, but just want to help everybody get successful, and maybe some good karma will rub off. That's my goal.
Yeah, that's awesome. I mean, that's what we're trying to do too. So
Exactly.
Yeah.
joining us. I hope you enjoyed Indie Insight as much as we enjoyed putting it together for you. Remember, it's always a good time to go indie now.